SoundCartel.
We're talking to Rob Greenlee this episode, VP of Content and Partnerships at Libsyn, and now also the chair of the Podcast Academy. We find out what Rob has planned for the Academy, its goals, and who can join. We also discuss big streaming platform payments to podcasters, with some differing opinions on this side of the mic.
One of the big things that I've seen that has changed is Spotify, Google, Apple, Pandora, all these platforms are now competing against each other in the podcasting space for listeners. And that's going to benefit the listener side tremendously, and it's going to benefit the podcaster because it's going to grow the audience.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nick Schildberger, and this is Podcasting Essentials. Welcome to episode 8 of season 4. And welcome once more to my co-host, Nicole Goodman.
Hey Nick, great to be back behind the desk again. I'm really excited to be talking this episode to friend of the show and now chair of the Podcast Academy, Rob Greenlee, and getting a sense of where he sees it going and how they can ensure that countries outside the US, like us in Australia, can play a role.
Yes, well, it's definitely a global medium, this little old thing called podcasting, so it'll be very interesting to hear how we can all play a role. But before we get to Rob, a couple of things have stood out in the industry since we last spoke.
Yes, there were just over 131,000 new shows added to Apple Podcasts in June, which is an all-time record and likely to be attributed to the downtime that we've had during COVID. Everyone's in lockdown looking for something to do. But also interesting is that new releases have also declined in June.
So I think what that's saying is that despite it being a huge month for new shows, by the end of June it was already starting to decline. So my prediction is that we had record months in April, May and June, and perhaps July will not be as big as the month before.
That's right.
But let's get to today's interview because there's a lot to discuss.
Yes. As well as being the VP of Content and Partnerships at Libsyn, Rob Greenlee is now the chair of the newly formed Podcast Academy, a very prestigious title. And Nick, no small job ahead to herd these podcasting cats.
No, that is true.
But being a veteran of the industry, Rob is acutely aware of the intricacies of the medium, and he's undoubtedly up to the task. So let's get straight to it. Rob, thank you so much for being with us again on Podcasting Essentials, and congratulations on being named chair of the Podcast Academy. It's only been a short time now, but it's a huge role. How's it been going?
It's been going great. Actually, I haven't really been in this chairperson role for very long. It's only been probably about a month now, but it's been going fine. I have yet to have a board meeting with the governors as the chairperson, so this is coming up on July 15th, so is when we all get together again. So we're only getting together about once every quarter, but the various committees in the organization are speaking almost daily right now. So just because we're open for membership and people are coming in, and we've had our ups and downs with that process too. I think things have gone a lot better since we dropped the recommendation letter requirement for being a member.
Yeah.
And so now it's just a name and an email address, and then that kind of shifts the workload over to our part-time staff that we've hired to run most of the back end of the Podcast Academy. So it's very helpful to have even a part-time staff that helps on this kind of stuff. But it's been a terrific process. I've been trying to pull the industry together, pull the board members together too. So it's a little bit of a new thing where I'm plowing new ground here.
There's been a bit of controversy about the Podcast Academy. Some are for it and some aren't. So let's try to break it down a little bit. What are the goals and the aims of the Academy?
Well, I think at the very top level, it's an organization to support recognizing excellence in the podcasting medium itself around an awards, hopefully on a global scale, but at least on a U.S. level scale to get started with. We're still working on the global side of it right now. But I think at the high level is an awards for excellence in podcast production and skills and things like that, and working with the podcaster community to develop programs that can have some educational initiatives, working with other conferences and trade shows, and actually doing some of our own webinar type activities, trying to help share best practice skills with what's called kind of peer groups that we're gathering together as part of the membership application for the Academy. If you're an editor that edits podcasting, we're going to know that in our database, and we'll be able to come up with some educational initiatives and things like that to support editors, or if you're a director, or if you're a producer, or if you're a host, or ad sales, or whatever that might be over a period of time here. We can come up with educational initiatives that would target those type of skill development areas. And then hopefully, my ambition is to bring even more things together with the Academy, like the Hall of Fame and maybe some other awards that can be done in other places and in other more focused on listeners, I think is another aspect of this too. But it's really a matter of pulling the industry together and getting people's feedback about what they want as well. So those are the two core things that the organization is all about. But I'm looking at expanding that because I think the podcasting medium, and I've been very vocal about this for the last 3 or 4 years, that we need not necessarily a trade organization, but more of an organization that can bring the industry together and share best practices and to work together in building listenership or building better quality podcasts, and also bringing together listening platforms to help take advantage of some technology opportunities that may exist by everybody kind of working together.
And Rob, you mentioned awards. I think when you launched the Academy, they were going to be called the Golden Mics, but I believe that may be changing the name.
Yes, complete change and review. So we're going through that process right now, and we should have an idea what that name might be probably by our July 15th meeting. So I think that will be voted on by the Board of Governors of what they would like to see happen. My personal preference would be to put it out to the community and have the community vote for it. That's what I'm going to offer as an idea to the Board of Governors, is we need to get the membership and the external podcasting community more involved in some of these decisions and be a little bit more transparent about it. But we're going through kind of a selection process right now about trying to select a new name, because the name that was initially proposed was already being used in the news and journalism business, so can't use that.
I see. Is the plan still for them to be an Oscars-style awards? Is that the plan?
Yes. So the plan is to have the awards happen actually in Los Angeles in the first quarter of 2021 is the goal. And we may be aligning that with a large podcasting conference that may be going on in the LA market at that time. I can't really say who that is, but that's a possibility as well. So I'm trying to bring all these things together. But yeah, our target is to shoot for the first quarter of 2021. So hopefully we'll all be a little bit further beyond this COVID-19 thing that's been a pain in all of our sides around every parts of our lives.
Yeah.
Have there been a decision yet as to whether Australian or other international podcasts will be eligible to enter the awards?
Yeah, we've already made the decision that we're a global organization. So we're taking membership outside of the U.S., and we're actually going to be looking for nominations from everywhere. So is my anticipation at this point that is exactly what will happen.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Very exciting.
Yeah,
really good.
Us over here. Now, you mentioned before that the joining process, that there was originally you need a letter of recommendation, and that's now been removed. But could you just explain what the process is to join and the cost for those of our listeners that want to join?
Yeah, it's fairly straightforward. There's kind of two ends of the spectrum here, is those that are talking on the mic and ones that are behind the mic. So we've broken up the industry into two sides. So those that are on air talent, essentially, is what you might want to call it. And then those that are maybe doing post-production, maybe doing advertising sales, maybe on the technology side, maybe producers, things like that. They would be front of the mic is the exact terminology. So we have kind of two big buckets. Now that doesn't limit you from being involved in any particular part. So let's say you're a host of a podcast that basically you're the host, you're the editor, you're the post-producer, you're the pre-producer, and you actually take out the trash too. You can actually select all that as part of your in front of the mic selection. So you can select all the different skills. But what we're looking for is your primary skill, what you are best at, what you do the best at. If you consider yourself your best skill in podcasting as a podcast host, then select host. If you think that you're the best at what you do as a co-host, then select co-host. Or if you're an editor or whatever that is, We're just looking for people to be in these peer groups that have higher skill levels that we can create awards around, and to have peer groups that can vote on what's good and maybe what's not so good. So that's the bigger agenda with that. But as far as the application process, so once you've kind of gone through that, then it's basically now through the end of September, it's $50 to join. That's $50 US to join. And then after that, it'll be $100 is a plan. So we do have a student membership as well. That's currently at $50 as well, but that'll be after the promotion window will be $75 after that. So if you're a student, you still need to get some note from your instructor or somebody like that to say that you're involved in audio or you have that interest or whatever that is part of your application. But as far as everyone else that's kind of in the industry of podcasting, it's just a matter of giving a reference to either a board member like myself, and you can certainly use my name if you want to, Rob Greenlee, and you can use rob.greenlee@gmail.com. And hopefully you're already a podcaster, and it's easy for our staff to find some work that you've done in the podcasting space. So that's the key for that. And it's really as simple as that. There's really not much else that you have to do other than fill out some basic information about yourself and pay the $50.
Okay.
So
it's pretty simple.
yeah. Yep.
Rob, some of the concerns that have come out about the Academy are around the voice of independent or smaller budget podcasts being drowned out when it comes to voting.
Right.
Does the Academy need to be inclusive? Or if you think of the Oscars, the Tonys, the Emmys, has podcasting just reached a point where the largely well-funded, well-known podcasts just deserve to be celebrated?
Well, I think it's a complicated question to answer fairly for all parties involved. I think that a lot of the larger networks do put forth a lot of investment in the type of productions that they put together, and they're typically very highly produced programs, and those are shows that are excellent as well. But there are also podcasts that are produced by more of the independent side of the equation that don't have big budgets behind them that are also excellent as well. So it's finding this balance, and we are going to take into account voting in this. So let's say you're a large network that has 100 employees or something like that that work for the network, and that one of their or two of their podcasts are nominated for a certain award. Well, we've already started working through some issues around how to balance that voting block to make it fair with all the other shows. So I think we recognize that some of the larger networks could have an advantage on the voting side. So we're going to take that into account when we tally up all the results to see where the votes are coming from and what the affiliations are. And so there is sensitivity to that, and because we do want to make it really based on excellence of podcasting, not so much who has the most money or the most marketing budget or whatever that might be that can drive attention to a particular podcast. And I think it's a difficult one to walk as you look at, like, say, the Academy Awards, or you look at film and music and some of those, and even TV, how those tend to gravitate towards giving awards to the bigger studios or the bigger production platforms. I think that we're going to give this a try and make sure that we can keep it balanced. But it certainly is not going to be something that's going to be easy, because as we've seen in these other mediums, there has been kind of a split that's happened over time, and that's unfortunate. But I think podcasting, as you look at its culture, and this is a big thing that I'm trying to push forward as part of the Academy as well, is trying to maintain the culture of the independent community, because it is such a huge part of the podcasting space, which hasn't always been the case in movie and in music and things like that. It didn't necessarily come from that, where podcasting came from the independent creator. And I think what we have to do is create processes to enable that culture to continue. Yeah.
Now, Rob, what representation opportunities are there for countries outside of the US to get involved and play a part in the Academy?
Yeah, we're pulling those ideas together right now. So we're open to ideas. I'm certainly hearing from folks in Australia. I'm hearing from folks in Europe and in Asia and around the world that have an interest in being involved in the Podcast Academy. And I think there is going to be pathways for that, and that's going to be a big topic at the board meeting coming up on the 15th, is how we can best facilitate the participation of podcasters like yourselves that are in Australia, that are doing terrific podcast work, that they can get involved, they can participate, they can nominate, they can be part of the whole process. And I don't see any reason why that's not possible.
Mm-hmm. Now, I just want to switch over to podcast monetization. Mm-hmm. You recently did a couple of great shows on the New Media Show about podcast monetization. Mm-hmm. One where you actually had Adam Curry on, the Podfather, which was brilliant.
Right.
And he actually said something that jumped out at me. He said that Spotify have spent bucket loads on their podcast strategy and they don't really have the spare cash of, say, an Amazon to just keep going. Mm-hmm. So that for every minute someone's listening to Spotify podcast, it actually saves them money from having to pay royalties on the songs on Spotify Music. So in other words, it's incredibly advantageous that no licensing or monies are required to podcasters like it is with music. Mm-hmm. And we're just, as podcasters, happy for our content to be there.
Right.
What does that say about the big platforms and how they value podcast content and how we as podcasters and producers value our content, and what changes, if any, need to be made?
Well, I think that the big thing to take away from that is that we all, as podcasters, we trade on our desires to reach audience more than we do really anything else. I know most podcasters would love to monetize their podcast and make some money from it so they can maybe quit their day jobs and do it full time. And I do think that that is an ambition that many have had for many, many years. But the truth of the matter is that most podcasters do it for other reasons other than just monetization. So there's always going to be a large chunk of the podcasting community that's not really going to care about this topic that much. But those that do, it is an issue. There's no question. Now, there are examples of some of these platforms spending a lot of money on licensing podcasts, but they tend to be the really big shows, right? So like the Joe Rogan Experience is the most recent example. And I believe that's what kind of sparked this discussion with Adam Curry on the podcast, was the $100+ million or whatever that deal was with the Joe Rogan podcast. It's a big chunk of money, and he's now moving his show over to Spotify. I think it raises a lot of questions in the long term. And I agree with Adam's sentiment that every time a person listens to a podcast on Spotify or any of the music streaming platforms for that matter, it's not just Spotify, and all of them are getting involved in podcasting now. So in various stages of process. So they're all going to wind up saving money on music licensing by people listening to podcasts. And I do think that one of the potential purposes of the Podcast Academy is to maybe take on that topic a little bit and say maybe there is something in the future for podcasters that are at a certain level that get into a revenue share type of opportunity. I do know that many of these music streaming platforms have expressed an interest in doing ad revenue share relationships with podcasters. So this may be a two-headed issue, right, where there's maybe revenue share off of advertising, but I think everybody's a little bit scared about them just going in and inserting advertising without the podcaster's permission. And there may be a little bit of that goes on, but I think it's up to the podcast community to push back on that if that does happen. And there are examples over the last 15 years of this exact situation happening. Actually, it happened with Stitcher in the early days of the podcasting medium, where they were inserting ads between episodes in a linear playback experience, and the podcast community just blew up on them. I'm just not sure that the podcast community is quite as integrated in their cultural viewpoint on this topic like they were back in probably 2008 or 9.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that last point, Rob. And taking that one step further, a lot of our audience and our clients here at SoundCartel are brands who are getting into podcasting, or associations, not-for-profits that are not so interested in earning, to quote you, nickels on the dime from Spotify or other platforms. They're getting into podcasting to get their message out, to add value to their audience. Mm-hmm. And in my experience, they're keen to get onto every platform. They're delighted that Spotify have made such a big play in this space. But perhaps what they're not so aware of is who owns their content once it ends up on Spotify or Stitcher or Apple, or as you said, there's going to be more and more platforms that are going to move into providing podcasting. Who owns the content? What control do you have over ads appearing or not appearing, or your content being broken up into smaller chunks and served up by Google search in a way that you may have never intended?
Right. I mean, at this point, I don't know of any podcast listening platform that says in their terms of service that they own your content by making it available. And if there is one out there, I think the industry needs to take some exception to that platform and maybe not participate in it. But I would say that there is some concern there, I would say. I would agree. I mean, I do think that the branded podcasts, like you were talking about, the people that are out there producing content that they don't have any expectation of monetizing, I think that's the vast majority of content that's out there. So I just don't think there's maybe 10 to 15% of the podcasts in the podcasting space that are in a position or really have a strong desire to monetize anyway. So, I think that that's what these big platforms have to face, is the fact that a lot of these podcasters don't really agree with monetization around their podcasts. And even though they may want to do that, they're actually already making money from people's podcasts because they're saving money, right?
Even for branded podcasts that don't have advertising inserted programmatically or otherwise, I mean, that's still great content from a brand that should be compensated to a degree. Yeah. But anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I have a feeling, I think what's going to happen is that the shows that are garnering audience are the ones that are going to be the shows that these big platforms pay attention to. And because those are the ones, obviously, that are saving them the most money on their music royalty payments as well. But they may want to get into revenue share relationships with certain shows, and like what we've seen with the Joe Rogan Experience, sign licensing deals and maybe even make them exclusive to these platforms. And it's debatable whether or not that's good or bad for the medium if content starts going exclusive. But there's a long history of that happening in the medium. It isn't like this is a tremendously new concept that podcast content has been licensed specifically to a particular platform. I did it back when I worked for Microsoft back in 2008. I did it with a couple of shows out of a podcast network. They were exclusively available to my Zune podcasting platform. It's going to be a spotty thing. It's not going to happen that frequently. And who knows, over time, that whole premium category could start to take off too, and people paying for subscriptions. And as the quality increases, I think the opportunity for monetization around premium starts to grow as well.
Yeah, see, I come from a slightly different perspective, which is why Nicole's laughing.
Right.
But I'm comfortable if there's a value exchange, then podcasters should be happy.
Right.
So Spotify might not be paying podcasters directly right now, but they are investing in the industry.
Right.
They are providing an audience for a podcast that didn't exist 18 months ago.
Right.
You might have an audience of 10,000 listeners, and then you put your podcast onto Spotify and you get 100,000 listeners.
Mm-hmm.
And in the music industry, the majority of musicians are not making money
right.
out of streams on
right.
streaming platforms.
Right.
They're using it to promote their live shows and their merchandise
their
and
concerts,
whatever
right.
else. I mean, right now that's a bit difficult to run a concert.
Right.
But so I think podcasting, it's a similar thing. And okay, yes, Spotify might be saving some money by running podcasts, but then the counter argument is, well, if they then reinvest that money back into the industry and
right.
increasing the profile of podcasting, then isn't that a good thing for all of us?
Yes, it is a good thing. I absolutely see that perspective. I still think that giving something for no monetary return in this exchange is slightly devaluing the content. I understand that music is not getting the return these days at all on streaming platforms. Of course, that's true. And I think the difference is if music started from an independent position, you might have these streaming platforms with, like podcasting, every man and his dog putting up a song and not getting paid for it. So
right.
it's just the way that these industries have rolled out.
Rob, do you want the final word on this? I don't want to debate it all day.
Yeah. The other point to think about, too, and looking at this specifically at the listening platforms, is that they do need a revenue model. I mean, that was the big issue that I had working on a catalog myself for Microsoft was, how do I convince the team to invest in the infrastructure of the listening platform to grow the catalog beyond the US or to expand its capabilities or to grow the catalog or whatever, if there's no financial benefit coming back to the company for investing in all of that engineering and talent and things like that. So there is a cost structure going on at these listening platforms to make podcasts available, that they've hired staff and employees, and they're doing marketing, they're doing all sorts of things like that too. So there is a benefit to these big listening platforms, to the podcasting industry. And I've said in the past too that one of the big things that I've seen that has changed is Spotify, Google, Apple, Pandora, all these platforms are now competing against each other in the podcasting space for listeners. And that's going to benefit the listener side tremendously. And it's going to benefit the podcaster because it's going to grow the audience. And that's been one of the things that I've been concerned about with this 133,000 new shows added in 1 month to the podcasting space, is that are the listeners level growing at the same pace that the content's growing? Because if it isn't, then we're going to see a contraction on the content side. And that's the other side of this coin. Is it's really easy to point the finger at these big platforms and they've got a lot of money and they're taking advantage of content creators. But at the end of the day, they're adding a lot of value to the ecosystem as well, and aggregating audiences for those branded podcasts like Nick that you're talking about here, that are just looking to reach more potential customers for their brand.
I think we all agree. We're all kind of saying the same thing. Kind of.
I think that valuing the content creator more, I think, is important, as well as supporting those listening platforms. So I think what we have to do is we have to strike a balance between those two things and not have it be overweighted too much one way or the other. And I think that's the key of being able to make this all work. And that may not be possible, but I think we should all give it a try.
Bring it all back to the Podcast Academy, getting some smart minds in the same room to debate these topics, and opening the communication channels with the platforms and with the producers is going to be a fantastic thing.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if I can get them all together in one room and we can talk about this stuff and we can work something out. Because my fear is that these big music platforms are going to tend to maybe want to take advantage of the podcasters and not be fair, right? Yeah. So whatever fair looks like is open for debate right now, but to not just come in and just take advantage. Right.
Well, you have a job ahead of yourself, Rob. There's no doubt about that.
That's it.
Now,
well, hey, there's nothing new about this. These have been issues in this medium since it started. So it's just now it's becoming a little more real.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
It's good. It's good that we're having these discussions, these debates. It's healthy. It's healthy for the industry.
Yeah. When you see the big dollars being spent by these platforms, it's making it a real thing.
Exactly.
Now, to finish, Rob, I like to finish with a crystal ball. It's been a very challenging year, as we all know, and podcasting has not avoided that. It's been quite a difficult 6 months. But what I want to know is, how do you see the next 6 to 12 months panning out for podcasting?
I think we're going to see the growth of the content side kind of slow down a little bit. I think we've had a flurry, and I think it's because there's a lot of people that got laid off. There's been a lot of people that have been stuck at home, a lot with spare time. And so we've seen a big spark in content creation, which is always terrific. I mean, I don't want to come across as somebody that's saying that it's a bad thing. It's not. I just think that it's something that will probably fade off a little bit and get back to a little bit more normal as far as content growth. And on the listener side, I think as these big platforms come in, and we're going to see some really, really large music platforms, music listening platforms from around the world get involved in podcasting more and more. Some other technology companies out there getting involved in podcasting that haven't been yet too much getting involved. I think we're just going to continue to see the medium grow and develop. And once we kind of get that saturation on the listening side, I think the next thing that's going to happen is going to be what I like to call kind of vertical app listening platforms will start to emerge as the next big phase for podcasting. So when I say there's some evidence of this already, but just use, like sports as one example. So you could have an app that is birthed that is focused on a particular genre that has written content, video content, and podcast content all integrated into one experience. And podcasting could be lumped in with that, with podcasters from a particular genre to support that vertical topic. And so I think that may not happen in the next 6 months, though there are a few apps that I've been talking to that are looking at verticals like women is one vertical that could be catered to for specific types of content that's bubbling up right now, and there's others out there. So I think that the advertising market will be fairly stable over the next 6 months. I don't think we're going to see any spectacular growth in that, but I think it will be steadily doing its thing, and certain genres of advertisers will be good and other ones will be probably backing away. But overall, I think that there's going to be a lot more consolidation that's going to happen, and you're starting to see that a little bit with the deal with Pandora and Simplecast, that deal in the SiriusXM network, and I'm sure that these type of deals will continue to happen into the future. So I think a lot of companies are always for sale.
Okay, thank you, Rob.
So that's what I think, right?
Thank you so much for taking your time. I know it's evening where you are. Thank you for being with us. We really appreciate your expertise, your insights, and of course, again, congratulations on Chair of Podcast Academy, and all the best.
Thanks so much, Rob.
Well, thank you very much. It was terrific to be on your podcast again, so I wish you guys the most luck.
Well, that was an unexpected debate, but quite enjoyable.
It was more like a robust discussion, I think, but very enjoyable, actually.
Now, it was terrific having Rob on the show, and I am very excited to see what he does with the Podcast Academy. For those listening who want to join, you can do so on their website, which is thepodcastacademy.com.
Yeah, it'll be really great to get over COVID-19 and see if we can actually go to the awards in LA.
That would be a real treat and something to look forward to, fingers crossed. Well, that's it for this episode of Podcasting Essentials. Thanks, Nicole, for joining me as always.
No problem. My absolute pleasure as usual, Nick.
To find out more about how we can help you create a podcast, check out our website at soundcartel.com.au. And don't forget to listen to our own daily business podcast, Business Essentials Daily, wherever you're listening right now. From all of us at SoundCartel, thanks so much for listening.